All right, let's talk about rounding corners of a cube. What I'm going to do in this demonstration is I'm going to draw a 3/4 top-down view of a cube. We're all familiar with this. This is the basis for a lot of our recent quizzes. And I am going to be rounding the corners. So I'll show you what I mean in a second. You're going to start with drawing your accurate 3/4 top-down view cube. And for my demonstrations, just personally, I'm just always doing parallel lines. Remember, I'll accept parallel lines or I will accept converging lines. Oh man, why is this line giving me grief? There we go. Make sure that your lines correlate the way that they need to with how the edges correlate. So notice that I had to erase and kind of redraw some angles. Okay, perfectly vertical. And then these guys are parallel to each other. So if you notice something is off, because some of this hand-eye coordination takes practice, right? Then you erase it and make it correct. You have to know when it looks off, though, to know if you should fix something. All right, so we've got our cube. Going to be meticulous with these corners just because this is what I am rounding. Okay, so I'm going to take these hard-tipped corners and I'm going to round them out, okay? So if I were to do some theory off on the side, this is my 3/4 top-down view, right? Over here, I'm going to draw a square, and that's going to represent just a perfect top-down view. I'm not seeing any depth because it's just going to be the top-down view of this cube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to round out these corners. They're not going to be perfect little right angles that are pointy like that. So how do you get curves for your angles? They come from circles, right? So the real thing here to remember is you want all of your corners to be rounded in the same radius consistently. So if I had a circle like that, and if I had a circle like that, okay, they look pretty similar, right? What if I had a circle like this? Okay, the radial curve of this corner is going to be different than the radial curve of this corner. This one is going to cut more into the interior. This one is still going to be a little bit closer to the outside tip corner edge. So we want the outside corners, when we round them, to be consistent. So how do you know that they are consistent? Well, what I'm going to show you is the guidelines for what we're going to use to make sure that we can round our cube out with consistent corners. Now, there's many other videos on YouTube that show you, specific for product design and industrial design, how to do this very precisely. But I'm just going to give you guys some general guidelines that we'll do for the sake of the quiz. There will be some eyeballing involved. Make sure that you can eyeball well. You need to have a good assessment of amounts of space. But besides that, it's just going to be some general guidelines to help get what we need for rounded corners here. So ultimately, how would you know that your circles are about the same size? Like this one's a little bit smaller than this one. You would have some guidelines, some alignment lines, right? So notice that it looked like he was a little bit too small, but now I can really tell because if I extended a guideline from the bottom part of this circle straight out, oh, he's not quite as big as he needs to be. So that's what we're going to end up doing. We're going to start with a circle in a corner, and that circle is going to be the basis for the size of all the other circles. So you get to choose the size of your first circle. Notice I'm putting down guidelines, the top and the side. Okay, so how did I know where to put this line right here? That was just me eyeballing that amount of space. Okay, but now I've got the guidelines, the alignment guidelines from those circles. These are all roughly about the same size right there. So do you see how it kind of looks like we've got 4 circles in the corners? We have these alignment guidelines. What I'm going to end up doing is taking this idea and I'm going to superimpose it onto the 2 side planes and the top plane. So how do I actually apply this then to the cube that I'm looking at right here, my top-down 3/4 cube? I'm going to look at this corner that's closest to me right here, and I'm going to assess an equal amount of space here and here and here. Okay, I'm eyeballing this, right? So eyeball well. You might need to come up just a little bit. We want equal amounts of space right here. Dot, dot, and a dot. Okay, so these will now become guidelines. Just like this. Just like this. Remember, any sort of side plane where you have an angled line needs to correlate with that side plane edges right here. So we've got the top edge right here. Notice that we have a side plane guideline. It needs to be parallel. At least in my example, it needs to be parallel. If you are choosing not to do parallel lines, that means you're choosing to make your lines converge as if they're going to an actual vanishing point. So just make sure that that's consistent then. All right, so down here, I'm assessing the amount of space from here to here, making it the same down here. Mrs. Jekyll, how did you do that? Oh, I eyeballed it. Make sure you're eyeballing well. Things should not look off, right? I know there's some discernment to knowing if something is off or not, but by this point, we've been practicing this. You should be able to understand, like if you really wanted to, you could always grab a measurement and see if it's the same. Now this line right here, remember I'm eyeballing this as well. Realize that as we get further away from the viewer, visually, amounts of space will seem to compress a little bit or get a little bit smaller. So just take that into consideration, but don't overdo it, right? Okay, so do you see what I'm doing here? I'm taking this theory and I'm placing it onto the side plane here. I'll do the same thing with this side plane. I need to stop being so sketchy. Okay, remember we had that guideline right there. The big thing to remember is consistency with these amounts of space. And then how do you angle these guidelines? Angle them accurately. In my case, I need to angle my lines parallel to the side plane that they're a part of. Okay, and now I'm going to do the top plane. Okay, so we understand what's happening here. Kind of looks like almost a Rubik's Cube. So in these corners, we have our ellipses. Remember, they're not perfect circles because in perspective, they are ellipses. They're all roughly about the same size, right? Here we go. This top one. Now there's a lot, oops, there we go. There's a lot about these guidelines that I am going to erase later on, right? This is helping me get to my desired result. But in the end, I just want to be left with my dice, which would be like a cube with its rounded corners, right? Another application for this with like product design would be if you took this cube and if you made it much thinner and elongated it more like a rectangle, that would be like the basis shape for your smartphone, iPhone or Android, or like your phone case, right? It's like a cube, but it's thin and it's long and it's flat and it's got rounded corners. So as I look at this, when I'm going to round these corners, remember we had a cube, we had a box that had sharp planal change corners, right? So when we're going to round them, we're going to, excuse me, we're going to cut into more of the interior of that three-dimensional box. And now I have everything that I need to start doing that. So I'm going to start with the outside perimeter just here on the left-hand side. I'm going to start boldening what I'm going to be left with. And notice that we've got a circle here and a circle here. I'm going to average out how they would connect like this. That is my rounded corner. Notice this back one. I'm just going to follow that radial trajectory of that ellipse back there. Coming over to this side, same thing. Don't put in a little dip right there. We're rounding out the corners. I'm just going to average that out. Remember, this is just a good, simple, guidelined way on how to get rounded corners for something like dice. Okay, so you guys would understand what I'm doing here. I'm going all the way around the outside edges. There we go. Very nice. Now at this stage, you can already see how the rounded corners, like it's starting, the dice, if you will, is kind of starting to take shape. But now I'm going to indicate an interior corner that's rounded. Realize that this initial line right here that was acting as that edge that's sharp and closest to me, including like this little corner right here, this now no longer exists, right? Everything has been soft and rounded. I don't have a sharp corner. I don't have a sharp planal change edge right here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to lighten my lines, not fully get rid of them. I'm just going to lighten them because I want to use these as guidelines, but I'm going to actually draw some corner edge work here. Okay, so right here, what I'm going to do, I've got that circle. Just going to kind of follow that. I'm going to indicate the curvature right there of that corner. Same thing on the other side, following that angle. Realize we're cutting into the interior of the cube. So because of that, I'm actually drawing these rounded edge indicators, like this rounded corner indicator, a little bit inside. We don't have any longer a sharp vertical edge. Some of these I can now start to really erase instead of just lighten. Okay, so kind of bringing that over. The more I erase the guidelines, the more I bolden these rounded corners, even on the interior. Hopefully you guys can see what I'm talking about here. So even this, I can see faintly that circle. It's rounded out. Kind of like that. Same thing down here. See what I'm doing right there? Same thing could be said for this. Rounding that out. So for your quiz, what am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for accuracy of the cube for one thing, right? So like accuracy of your angled lines. I'm always looking for that. But then I'm also looking for equal and consistent rounded corners. It shouldn't look like you used a large circle in one area and a small circle for a corner in another area, okay? Consistency with the roundness of your corners. And then what's the other thing I'm looking for? The other thing I'm looking for would be an indication of the interior, okay? Meaning the indication of what are these rounded corners looking like, even in the interior here, my two side planes and my top plane. This takes a little bit of eyeballing, but use your guidelines. Remember, that's the balance we're doing with this. This is not a hardcore product design class. We're not teaching industrial design per se. This is just an introduction to something that designers legitimately use to construct things like products. So what are some general basic operations that they might use? So indicate how that would be rounded out for not just the outside perimeter, but then also these interior corners. How can we indicate with a line that goes along the edge, right? In that same angle. And then we're rounding that out using the circles that I can faintly see underneath as my guideline. Okay, so I'm looking at my top plane. I've indicated these corners of my top plane, my side plane, or my two side planes right here. I'm going to ask that you make bold that what we would see in reality. You can also erase what we would not see in reality. And I'm kind of doing a little bit of both, just like normal, right? So here we go. Now, down here, sometimes artists will give a little indication of how that's going to round out. But other artists, and what I will allow you to do, is you can round out this bottom corner and then just visually let him kind of bleed into that bottom edge right there. Because if we're top looking down, visually it would look like how this corner is rounding, might line up perfectly with this bottom edge. So that's fine. You can just do it that way. I hope that made sense, where you have this corner and you can just, as you round it out, have that just fall into the bottom edge right there. Okay, same idea as this guy where he kind of comes up and he kind of rounds himself and then he kind of blends into the outside edge. Same thing here. And we're seeing this corner here of the rounded corners.